Okay, so for this video, we're going to finish the PowerPoint for this chapter and actually go over um, the four Gospels, the introduction to the four Gospels in the next chapter. Um, and then we'll stop it there and then go over the birth narratives and the actual story of Christ, from the Gospels with a close biblical reading for that video. So this one, I'm going to just finish this up, just so you have an understanding of who he is. Jesus's followers proclaimed him the Messiah, Meshiach, right, or the Christos, meaning the Messiah, right? And he himself, especially in the Gospel of Mark, really doesn't ever call himself. He often says this phrase, "Who do you think that I am?" So someone will say, "Are you the Messiah?" And he'll say, "Well, who do you think that I am?" And the only time that he actually says, "Yeah, I am," is when he's on trial, because he's aware that he needs to be found guilty in order to be crucified, in order to take on the sins of the world, in order to introduce the new age, right? So the only time that he actually says, "Yes, I am," is when he knows he needs to say it. Beyond that, he rarely actually says that, exactly who he is in terms of the Son of God. Let's see. Some of the other titles that are attributed to him, a lot of people call him the Son of God. This one is a little confusing because what Jesus is fundamentally is seen through the doctrine of the incarnation, where Jesus is actually fully God. Because he's the Son of God, he is fully God and fully man. So he's like 100% God, 100% man, which is the incarnation. So some of the titles he has is the Son of Man. I think he himself calls him the Son of Man. The most often, and then sometimes he's called the Son of God, most often by other people saying, "Oh, he's the Son of God." So that's some more titles besides the Messiah. Some people call him with the term Lord, but it might have been an honorific title, kind of like, you're my leader, so you're my Lord. Now, in terms of his life, Jesus was born to a virgin named Mary in Bethlehem, which is in Judea. Mary was married to a carpenter named Joseph from Nazareth in Galilee. So Joseph, even though he originally is from Judea, and that's why he had to go down there for the census in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus was actually raised in Galilee, the northern region, which is where he did most of his ministry. All the Gospels agree that Jesus lived in Nazareth when he began his ministry, which is up in the north. Jesus was about 30 when he left Nazareth and was baptized by John the Baptizer in the Jordan River. John the Baptist was actually his second cousin, because John the Baptist's mother, Elizabeth, was Mary's cousin, first cousin. You'll learn about that story in the first 4 chapters of Luke, because Luke likes to parallel the John the Baptist's birth with the birth of Jesus as kind of like two cousins, second cousins, both being blessed in a certain way. Then Jesus spent some time in the Judean wilderness fasting, where he's tempted by Satan. Then the Gospel of John has him doing his ministry over a 3-year period, while the other Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, if you time it, it could be within a year. It doesn't necessarily have to be spread out over a year. His fundamental message was compassion for others rather than the strict observance of the commandments, which is why some of the Jews or the Jewish groups were mad at Jesus and his followers, because they seemed to be discounting the adherence to the laws and the commandments and the covenant, which Jews will see that as a problem, and that God will punish you if you start saying, "Oh no, you don't have to follow those laws," right? They've already experienced that with the exile and a whole host of devastating things. The Assyrian invasion, the Babylonian invasion. So they've already seen it. Prophets had been telling them this whole time. He warned people about the perils of wealth, how it can be a distraction, that it can be all in, consuming. He stressed the importance of being ready for the kingdom of God. Now, what is the kingdom of God? It's really, I guess what could say, heaven on earth. It's when everything, it's going to happen here, first of all, right? It's not like something way over there. The kingdom of God will be here when Christ comes again. And it will be a brand new beginning, a new social order where there will be no oppression, there will be no poor, there will be no enslaved, and those who do the enslaving and who oppress, society will be turned upside down. And not only will everyone be equal, but those who are oppressed will be at the bottom. And those who oppress will be at the bottom. And those who are being oppressed, who are enslaved, who are disenfranchised, will be victorious because they will be with Christ. So it does sound scary sounding that the whole society will be overturned, but it's a new beginning. That's what kingdom of God is, where everyone is in it together. All right. He also worked miracles. He raised people from the dead. He healed the sick and the blind and the lame. And in fact, many of the people that he healed were considered outcasts, meaning unclean. Like if you're a leper or if you're hemorrhaging blood, right? All of those things were considered unclean, and people like that would be shunned and would be outcasts of society because of their uncleanliness. But he seemed to go out of his way to actually heal people who were unclean, or interact with people who were considered, you don't talk to them. He would talk to taxpayers. He would talk to lepers. He would talk to women. He would talk to women who were quadruple divorced or committed adultery. He didn't care because everyone needed the kingdom of God. See, that's what makes him pretty amazing. He ended up, because he was causing all these problems in terms of saying, oh yeah, we don't need to do, Jewish commandments, or because Romans thought he was a zealot. It ended up he was arrested, put on trial, both by his own people, the Sanhedrin Council, and by Pontius Pilate, the Roman council, and then crucified, which is a long and low process, long and lengthy process, and eventually dies on the cross, not because of blood loss, but actually due to congestive heart failure. That's what happens when you are crucified, is you slowly drown in your own fluids because your heart starts to weaken. I know that's very gruesome. He dies on the eve of Sabbath. After he dies, some women come to dress his body, to anoint it with oils and things like that, only to find that his body is missing. And then here's where there's other differences, but there's differences in terms of who exactly comes to the tomb at the end of each of the Gospels. So I would encourage you to read those endings just to compare the differences. Then Mary actually seems to be the kind of the standard, the one who is always there, Mary Magdalene. And then after that, according to several different legends recorded in the Gospels and also in Acts and also by Paul, Jesus then appears to his disciples several times over the next 40 days before he actually goes to heaven to be with his Father. So that is his biography in here. And then let me give you a little bit more information in chapter 12, which goes into a little bit more detail of the 4 Gospels. Okay? Now, I also threw in a little bit of extra information about the life of Jesus in here, just in terms of the style. I put the content in terms of demonstrating the style within the 4 Gospels. Okay, so Gospel, what is that? In the New Testament, which is the second part of the Bible, we have the 4 Gospels, which are 4 biographies of Jesus. And in order of earliest to latest, and we had gone over this before at the first couple of chapters, it's Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Okay? It's not really a biography because they're very selective. It only kind of covers portions of Jesus' life. And, in terms of where he went and who he talked to, we don't actually have that much of it. It's not necessarily like a litany of things that he did. It's a combination of people that he interacted with, things that he did, things that he said, things that happened to him, but not like a detailed biography. In terms of who came first, who wrote first. The synoptic problem is there's a theory of how were these gospels written, right? Gospel of John is very different from the other three. And there's a lot of things that are missing from the Gospel of John. And then there's some that are missing from the three, Mark, Matthew, and Luke that are included in John's account. So we kind of take the Gospel of John and just like put him over here, okay? And then we take a look at the three remaining Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke. We call them synoptic Gospels because the word syn, like synonym or syncreticity or in sync, right? That means the same. So we generally think that Mark, Matthew, and Luke are all similar or that they were familiar with each other versus John, which is over there, okay? The hypothesis is that Mark is the earliest gospel. Mark was written around 70 CE or 75, maybe right around when the Second Temple fell, when it was destroyed by the Romans during the Jewish Wars around 70 CE. That was such a cataclysmic event that whoever the editors of Mark were felt that they needed to write stuff down or Christianity would disappear. So it's the way that it's written about in Mark 13, it feels like the temple destruction was pretty immediate or at least happening at that very moment. So Mark is around 70, 75 CE. Matthew apparently used Mark because there's large sections of Mark that are cut and pasted into the Gospel of Matthew, but not vice versa. So Matthew probably used Mark, and then Luke also had access to Mark. So both Matthew and Luke use the Gospel of Mark. All right. Matthew and Luke, of course, are very different. That's because the editors of those two Gospels are very different, but they have, sections that are word for word from Mark. Matthew and Luke also share kind of this anonymous source called Quell, or Q. Quell actually means just source in German. So they seem to have access to this other repository of Jesus information, which then they draw from. And then the additional information you find in Matthew and Luke that Mark doesn't have probably comes from this additional repository. Okay? These writers of these Gospels were probably not eyewitnesses to Jesus because they wrote 40 years, 30 to 40 years after Jesus died, but just collectors of stories and legends, and maybe knew some of the disciples as older men, but weren't privy or, present when Jesus was there. So there's actually a person named John Mark that's mentioned in the gospel. That the disciple Jesus and his disciples go to the mother of John Mark and they kind of hang out in her house. And so a lot of people think that John Mark, who might have been a little kid then, is actually the editor of the Gospel of Mark. So that's kind of cool. Now Mark, in terms of its themes, I would take a look at this, not just the PowerPoint, but the actual chapter, chapter 12, to look at the descriptions of each of the themes, because that's actually something quite important. And when we go over the Gospel of Mark, I do want to stress some of the themes of Mark, and I need you to be already familiar with it when I go over the Gospel of Mark. So just remember that it's the shortest and earliest gospel. The disciples are not depicted really great in the Gospel of Mark because they're kind of dumb, and there's an idea that the Passion Week, is more important than his early life. And so the speed at which we work your way through the gospel is very quick. He gets, the last 8 chapters of the very short gospel takes place in Jerusalem during that last week. So clearly that was the most important part. Okay, so just make sure that you're familiar with the themes. In addition, when I go over the birth narratives from Matthew and Luke, I'm also going to be talking about the themes of each of those writers as well, because that is manifested in the birth narratives as well. So make sure you take a look at the themes of Matthew, the themes of Luke, and of course the themes of John, even though we're only looking at 1 or 2 chapters of that. So make sure that you're familiar before we hit the Bible.